In one unforgettable moment, Barack Obama sat calmly beneath the studio lights and accused Donald Trump of betraying the very office he swore to uphold. No shouting, no theatrics, just quiet, devastating truth. Within seconds, America was split in two, composure versus chaos. The question hung heavy: was this the moment everything changed? Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. The studio lights burned hot against the polished desk, the kind of intensity meant to expose every flicker of discomfort. But Barack Obama looked untouched. Millions were watching. Primetime America tuned in, the cameras pulling tight on a man whose calm body language stood in stark contrast to the storm his words were about to unleash. His hands were clasped loosely, his back straight, his expression focused. Across from him sat the host, shuffling notes nervously, sensing that something historic was about to pass through the airwaves. Obama leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, his cadence deliberate. There are ongoing violations in this White House. They are dangerous. They compromise the foundation of the presidency. The words were not shouted, they were not dramatized. They were delivered with the precision of a man who exactly the weight of what he was saying. For a moment there was no sound at all, just the echo of a truth too sharp to ignore. In homes across the country, families froze mid-conversation. At diners, waitresses paused mid-order. College students huddled around phones immediately hit rewind, replaying the clip as though they needed to make sure they had heard him correctly. Even the host could not contain the jolt. His eyebrows rose, his pen halted above the page. In the control room, producers whispered frantically, "We're making history." The host steadied himself, then asked the question everyone else was now screaming in their living rooms. "Mr. President, are you accusing the sitting president of crimes?" The air grew tighter, the silence between the question and the response pressing down like a weight. Obama didn't blink. He didn't flinch. His tone remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "I'm saying silence is complicity." The sentence cut deeper than any accusation shouted at a rally. It suggested that the highest office in the land was not just flawed, but actively undermining the country it was sworn to protect. The line pierced through screens, through living rooms, through political loyalties. America held its breath. Then the cameras cut wide, the music swelled, and the title card struck across the screen. America frozen in shock, bracing for what came next. For years, Barack Obama cultivated a reputation for restraint. His public life was defined not by how often he spoke, but by the precision of when and how he chose his words. Flashbacks to his first campaign trail speeches show the same lawyerly cadence he carried into the White House. Sentences built on balance, pauses that allowed his listeners to breathe, and a delivery that made even critics admit he was impossible to ignore. His voice was not the roar of the crowd, but the scalpel of a surgeon. He believed in the philosophy of speak less, say more, and in doing so, he learned to turn silence into strength. Years following his presidency, he leaned into that philosophy even further. Unlike other former presidents who couldn't resist weighing in daily, Obama stayed back, issuing carefully worded statements when the nation demanded it, but never indulging in political brawls. Each choice reinforced the aura that he was deliberate. He allowed others to dominate the airwaves while he conserved his influence for moments that truly mattered. This philosophy formed his core code. Truth is quiet but sharp, and composure is power. He understood that fury may burn hot, but calmness cuts deeper. When he paused during a speech, it wasn't hesitation, it was invitation. He gave space for the audience to step into the silence, to wrestle with the weight of his words. It was a mastery of timing that made every phrase land heavier than if he had shouted it. The strategic buildup of his silence carried a gravity all its own. For years, while controversies swirled, while the headlines shouted and political storms raged, Obama stayed deliberately still. He let the record unfold. He let history reveal itself. But then came this night, this interview, where he chose to speak in unflinching terms. Why now? That was the question rattling through living rooms and newsrooms alike. His timing felt surgical. It was as though he had marked the calendar long ago, waiting for the precise moment when silence would no longer serve the republic, when truth required his voice. His calmness was not weakness, not avoidance, but the weight of responsibility pressing him forward. He understood the stakes. When a man who built his reputation on restraint chooses to finally break it, the act itself carries a force that no amount of shouting can match. Obama's decision to speak was not just about politics. It was about duty. It was about legacy. It was about refusing to let history record his silence as complicit. If Obama was restraint, Donald Trump was combustion. His public persona thrived on motion, on noise, on the energy of a room whipped into frenzy. From his earliest campaign rallies to his late-night Truth Social posts, his core operating code remained the same: fight everything, admit nothing. To his supporters, it was defiance turned into theater, the swagger of a man who seemed to thrive on conflict itself. The montage of his career play like a highlight reel of defiance. Trump at a rally, red cap tilted forward pointing at cameras, bellowing accusations with a grin that dared anyone to stop him. Trump on the tarmac shouting denials over the roar of jet engines, his words blurring into the mechanical thunder but still somehow carrying. Trump at the podium, raising his hand in mock outrage, savoring the cheers of those who felt they were the voice against a system they didn't trust. His rhetoric was less about facts and more about dominance. He understood instinctively that volume could overpower detail, that relentless energy could bulldoze nuance. But beneath that combustible persona, cracks were visible to those willing to look closely. The fury that once looked like unshakable confidence began, at times, to resemble desperation. His endless counterattacks, his refusal to concede even the smallest point, became less the swagger of a fighter and more the survival reflex of a man cornered by mounting scrutiny. The louder he shouted, the more it seemed he was fighting not just opponents, but the very weight of evidence pressing down around him. Trump's emotional rhythm was the opposite of Obama's. Where Obama wielded silence like a blade, Trump filled silence with sound. He feared stillness because stillness gave room for doubt, for questions, for the cold reality of consequences. His power came from energy, from dominance, from turning every setting into a spectacle he controlled. But in the split screen America now saw, Obama calm, deliberate, his words precise, Trump fiery, explosive, his tone defiant, the contrast revealed a telling truth. That contrast would become the defining image of this moment in history. On one side, a former president breaking years of restraint to speak measured words of warning. On the other, a man whose entire brand depended on never stopping, never backing down, never allowing space for reflection. The tension between those two personas was not just political, it was generational, cultural, existential. And as America watched the calmness of Obama collide with the chaos of Trump, it became clear that this wasn't simply a political debate. It was a battle over what kind of power would shape the future, the sharpness of quiet truth or the roar of endless defiance. The studio lights burned with that quiet intensity only primetime television can conjure. Barack Obama leaned forward, fingers laced, the calm center of a storm no one yet fully understood. He did not raise his voice, nor did he wield the theatrics of outrage. Instead, his tone was deliberate, steady, the cadence of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms and cabinets, where every word could shift the balance of history. "There are documents," he said, his voice measured, "that have been deliberately withheld from public oversight, classified materials stored outside of proper channels, contracts negotiated in shadow without the knowledge of Congress, agencies pressured into silence." The list came not as a thunderclap, but as a scalpel, precise, almost surgical, cutting layer by layer into the very fabric of the presidency. Living rooms across America went still. Families leaned closer to their televisions, dinner plates forgotten. In college dorms, students crowded around glowing laptop screens, the sound echoing off cinder-block walls. In bars from Philadelphia to Phoenix, televisions usually reserved for sports flickered with Obama's face, and the clatter of pool balls and laughter gave way to silence. The nation held its breath as he continued, unhurried. "This isn't about politics. This is about the oath we take to protect not just our offices, but the American people. When that oath is broken, when the foundation is compromised, silence is not an option." Within minutes, hashtags began to climb the digital ladder. Obama bombshells, a Trump exposed, game shared with captions like historic and game over. On TikTok, teenagers recorded their stunned reactions, stitching themselves into the moment. Memes erupted, yet none of them undercut the gravity of the scene. They amplified it. The host across from him sat frozen, pen hovering in mid-air. Finally, the question spilled out, trembling with both awe and risk. "Mr. President, are you accusing the sitting president of crimes?" Obama didn't blink. He didn't smirk. He didn't search for a flourish. His reply was quiet, even, devastating. "I'm saying silence is complete. And then he sat back, calm, unflinching, as though he had simply recited a fact of nature. The cameras caught that stillness, and in it, America saw a man unwilling to be shaken, unwilling to be baited, unwilling to be silent any longer. The confrontation had begun, not with a shout, but with a whisper that louder than any rally chant. By dawn the next morning, Donald Trump had unleashed a digital storm. His Truth Social feed overflowed in all caps, the words practically vibrating off the screen. "Disgrace! Tonal witch hunt! Obama the sturst president in history!" Each post carried the heat of a man under siege, his fury spilling into exclamation marks and insults. The online world swirled in chaos, his supporters amplifying every post, his critics marveling at the volume of rage. But tweets and posts weren't enough. By mid-morning, Trump had summoned the press corps for an emergency briefing at one of his Gulf resorts. He appeared at the podium, red-faced, hair slightly askew, tie swinging as he jabbed the air with his finger. "This," he shouted, voice echoing against the gilded backdrop, "is the most shameful, most disgraced attack on a sitting president in American history. Obama is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, and he knows it." The press room buzzed with questions, reporters leaning forward, emboldened by the moment. "Mr. President, what about the classified documents he mentioned? Were they kept outside approved facilities?" Trump's head snapped toward the voice. "That's a lie, a total lie. We followed every procedure, every single one. Fake news trying to smear me because they can't stand my success." But even as he spoke, his voice cracked. The pitch of his fury betrayed the strain underneath. The difference between a man in control of the spectacle and a man trapped by it. He wiped his forehead with a folded paper towel, the cameras catching the sheen of sweat. Works replayed the scene in endless loops, split-screened against the previous night's interview. On one side, Obama, composed, calm, deliberate. On the other, Trump, flushed, raging, jabbing the air like a man fighting invisible enemies. The optics were unmistakable, and no amount of shouting could erase the visual contrast America was absorbing. By evening, analysts filled the airwaves. "This is the most striking split screen in modern politics," one anchor remarked. One man calm, the other combustible. One framing the issue as duty, the other as personal insult. Commentators debated furiously, but even those who tried to defend Trump admitted the imagery was working against him. The confrontation had escalated beyond words. It was now about optics, tone, and credibility. And in that battlefield, Trump's fury looked less like strength and more like panic. Across the country, the reaction took on a life of its own. In coffee shops, the morning crowd hovered over phones replaying clips. At barber shops, barbers paused mid-snack to argue with customers over what they had just witnessed. In veterans' halls, men and women who had sworn their own oaths sat stiffly, nodding at Obama's words, or shaking their heads at Trump's rage. In kitchens, families whispered while toast cooled on plates. The snippets of dialogue carried the pulse of the nation. He looks guilty. He looks credible. One's steady, one's losing it. The simplicity of those judgments spread like wildfire, and for the first time in months, the word that dominated focus groups wasn't economy or border. It was credibility. Early polling cracks began to show by midweek. Independents, the voters who often drifted on personality rather than party, started leaning. Pundits noticed the subtle shift. When asked who they trusted more, Obama's numbers rose even though he wasn't on a ballot, while Trump's sank under the weight of his own anger. Social media further amplified the divide. On Instagram Reels, users stitched side-by-side clips of Obama's measured calm and Trump's red-fied shouting. On YouTube, long-formed breakdowns dissected the rhetoric, contrasting the discipline of Obama's loyally phrasing with Trump's scattershot rants. TikTok teams turned the split screen into viral soundtracks, pairing Obama's phrase, "silence is complicity," with dramatic beats, while Trump's became a punchline, looped over dance videos. But beyond the memes, there was a serious undercurrent. Editorials in national newspapers carried headlines like, "The Test of Credibility," and "When Calm Exposes Chaos." Opinion writers noted that the confrontation was no longer just about documents or contracts. It was about trust, about who the nation believed when the stakes were existential. In living rooms, the conversations grew heavier. Parents explained to their children why former presidents rarely spoke out. Students debated in classrooms about the line between politics and patriotism. Pastors in pulpits referenced the moment as a lesson in accountability. The confrontation had leapt from television into daily life, reshaping dinner conversations and morning commutes. The foreshadow was unmistakable. This wasn't just another scandal to be chewed over and forgotten. This was a fracture in the national psyche, a test of what kind of leadership America valued. Calm precision or combustible fury? Credibility or chaos? Silence or complicity? And as the nation debated, one truth became clear. This was no longer about two men alone. It was about the very foundation of trust in American democracy. The confrontation had become a referendum, not just on Trump, but on the standard of truth itself. The first wave hit within hours of the broadcast ending. Networks carved the exchange into a tight reel, Obama leaning forward with that even timbre. "People deserve honesty." Hard cut to Trump in the briefing room, jaw tight, finger jabbing. "Obama is a disgrace." Editors slowed the audio a fraction so the contrast registered in the gut. The loop ran between weather and sports, the split screen becoming a national screensaver, the country's most replayed Rorschach test in years. Producers built packages around cadence, posture, breath. A body language analyst circled Obama's still shoulders with a digital pen and said, "Confidence." Another circled Trump's clenched fist and said, "Control slipping." Even channels that usually avoided politics ran the clip to explain America to their audiences. It traveled because it was simple. Calm against chaos, steel against thunder. Comedy pressed the bruise. A late-night sketch staged a duel at two podiums. Obama sipped water, waited, and said, "Facts." Trump hollered so loudly the microphones squealed. The studio roared, but the laugh carried an argument. Volume isn't proof. The bit jumped to TikTok, then Muckley Polynede, where teams stitched it to study videos labeled, "How to Win Without Shouting." Podcasts slowed the tape until each syllable landed. A former federal prosecutor broke down Obama's phrasing like a closing argument. Specific enough to be verifiable, careful enough to avoid defamation. "He isn't guessing," she said, "he's documenting." Newsletters followed with citations and timelines. Listeners forwarded the segments to parents who usually ignored politics, saying, "Just listen to the tone." Abroad, the imagery translated without subtitles. The BBC called it a televised trial without a courtroom. French anchors said, "Un réquisitoire calme." Brazilian papers ran sidebars on presidential comportment. In Seoul, a headline read, "Two styles of power collide on American TV." The story spread because it required no insider knowledge. The faces were the argument. Pollsters presented early crosstabs. Independents described Obama as credible, steady, and prepared. Some still aligned with Trump's message, but not his manner. A woman in Ohio, shown in a diner B-roll, said, "If you're right, you don't look rattled." Her quote became its own chyron, then a bumper sticker. Hertzers escalated the treatment. They built a 4-box. Obama's interview, Trump's presser, a timeline of previous denials, and a graphic reading, Trust vs. Fury. Commentators fought over substance, but the graphic kept winning. Even when the panel pivoted to inflation or foreign crises, the control room slipped the split screen back on air. It framed every topic. By week's end, the confrontation outgrew politics. It turned into a template. Corporate trainings borrowed the clip to illustrate crisis messaging. Sermons referenced it to distinguish meekness from discipline. Sports talk radio used it to debate leadership under pressure. The loop multiplied until it felt like a metronome ticking through the news cycle. Media rarely invents a story. It amplifies a signal. This week, The signal was unmistakable. Composure speaks louder than rage, and repetition makes it impossible to tune out. Each re-airing tightened the narrative thread. Each replay hardened perceptions, and each side recalibrated to the same drumbeat. Even skeptics who disliked both men admitted the optics were brutal. One anchor, not known for sentiment, summed it up. "In crises, tone is policy." That line trended because it sounded like something a civics textbook might admit. By Sunday, producers had named the saga without agreeing on its politics. They called it the split-screen week. That label stuck, not because editors insisted, but because viewers felt it. The image wouldn't leave. In the business of attention, images win. This one planted roots and waited for proof to grow. At street level, the story stopped being about famous men and started becoming a mirror. In a Cleveland barbershop, clippers paused mid-fade as the split screen looped on a mounted TV. "Calm ain't weak," the owner said. "It's discipline." A younger customer countered, "I still want a fighter." The room hummed while both truths hovered. Desire for force, respect for poise. In a Phoenix civics class, students treated the interview like case law. The teacher paused after each clause and had them write what could be substantiated, what was implied, and what remained conjecture. A quiet sophomore raised her hand. "If the tone made people listen, does that count as evidence?" The teacher answered, "It counts as persuasion, and persuasion moves power." Black churches turned the loop into a sermon illustration. Pastors drew on proverbs about soft answers and on civil rights speeches where stillness carried danger across bridges. The refrain was simple: calm is not surrender, it is focus. In fellowship halls afterward, elders said they'd seen that look before. Younger congregators recorded takeaways for TikTok. Leadership doesn't tremble. Suburban moms in Wisconsin texted links in PTA threads. "You don't have to like him," one wrote about Obama, "but he sounded like someone who has receipts." Replies were cautious, then curious. "I didn't like the yelling today. I want strength, not chaos. What if strength looks like quiet?" The thread pinned a clip under the words, "Watch before you answer." On factory floors, the split screen became a lunch-hour litmus test. A forklift operator in Toledo pointed with his sandwich and said, "If a boss talks like that in a safety meeting, we stop trusting the boss." A welder replied, "Maybe the boss is under attack." Their foreman, usually silent, said, "Either way, the job needs steady hands." The line went back to work, thinking about torque, steel, and temperament. Veterans' halls filled with measured nods. A Marine from Fallu told a reporter, "You can be loud on the range. In a firefight, you breathe. That's how you keep your people alive." The quote ricocheted through veteran Facebook groups, paired with looming captions about command presence. The argument was biographical, not partisan. It spoke the language of experience. Among Republicans, the response fractured without quite breaking. Loyalists posted, "He fights for us," and meant it. Others winced privately at the optics while insisting policy mattered more than tone. A county chair in Georgia told a podcaster, "We need the energy, but the energy needs aim." Her phrase caught on, a compromise between appetite and alarm. Memes made the lesson sticky. One showed a teacup balanced on a podium with the caption, "Stability." Another showed a shattered mug under the word volume. Hashtags surged: split screen, calm truth, receipts over rage. Teenagers who didn't vote picked sides based on aesthetics they understood. Composure looked cool, flailing did not. Their edits, set to sonatic strings, spread the moral with a wink. Night after night, call-in radio captured the country's internal monologue. Truckers on I-80 said a cant voice drove straight. Nurses finishing double shifts called to say they wanted leaders who conserved breath. One caller summed up the week in a sentence that hosts replayed all hour. "When the facts are heavy, shouting doesn't lift them." By week's end, engagement hardened into expectation. People didn't demand perfection. They demanded steadiness and proof. Petitions circulated asking for documentation to match the tone. Town halls promised open mics. Even those unmoved by the substance felt the pressure of the image. You didn't have to love the messenger to absorb the message. In the test of trust, composure is not optional. On Capitol Hill, the hallway scrum turned relentless. Camera lights snapped on at every elevator bank. "Do you believe the former president?" a reporter shouted at a centrist senator jogging between meetings. He kept moving, then finally muttered, "Everyone should want clarity." That half-sentence led cable. Hours. Committee rooms buzzed with conversations that pretended to be about unrelated bills. Staffers compared notes on constituent calls. Spikes in swing suburbs, new phrases showing up in emails. Credibility, steadiness, proof. Chiefs of staff drafted memos urging their bosses to address tone. "Voters are watching style as a proxy for truth," one memo read. "Do not reward rage." Some Republicans doubled down, booking every friendly show to denounce Obama as theatrical. Others dodged the cameras entirely, taking stairwells and tunnels to avoid the on-the-record trap. A handful cracked on local radio, offering sentences that sounded like exits, not defenses. "If he says there are issues, let's see them." And, "We should get the facts." Democrats smelled an opening, but leadership cautioned against gloating. "We're not here to spike the football," one whip told members on a conference call. "We're here to demand documentation." Talking points emphasized trust over triumph. Surrogates were told to repeat a refrain until it lodged in memory. "This isn't about personalities, it's about the presidency." The message polled well. It also felt like an adult in the room. Donor class jitters followed the optics. In Manhattan boardrooms and Silicon Valley kitchens, funders asked consultants whether the brand could survive another year of fury at a podium. The answer came back as a slide deck filled with screenshots of the split screen and a summary line. Optics bleed into outcomes. Checks paused or moved toward committees that promised steadiness with receipts. Inside the White House orbit, allies argued about strategy. Some urged a paper defense. Timelines, affidavits, anything that looked like proof. Others warned that answering on paper conceded the frame. The result was a muddle. More posts, more rally riffs, and no new facts. Across Washington, the choice read as fear of testing claims against records. Reporters widened the aperture. Investigative desks chased the threads Obama had named. A Justice Department watcher teased a quiet concern memo about mishandled materials. A national security consultant said the phrase "procedures were not followed" had appeared in an internal email months earlier. Editors debated standards while rolling chyrons that said "mounting questions." The drip made a drumbeat. State houses felt it too. Governors fielded questions about norms and security briefings. One Republican governor told a press gaggle, "You can fight the other side without burning down credibility." The clip ran on local news across 3 states and got called courageous and obvious. His approval ticked up. In law schools, the moment entered syllabi as the split-screen week. Clinics assigned students to draft model guidelines for presidential communications under investigations. Speak only when necessary, cite facts, avoid performative outrage. A dean told an auditorium, "Institutions survive when leaders understand tone is a public safety tool." The applause sounded like relief. By Friday, rumors hardened into reporting. Subpoena language was drafted in a committee that hadn't planned to meet. Bipartisan staffers whispered about witness lists. "If there's nothing to hide, bring the records," a Midwestern representative said on camera, then added, "Silence isn't a defense." The phrase fit on a placard, and by evening someone had printed one. The system, shaken, did what systems do when survival instincts engage. It sought paperwork. The spectacle had made its argument. Now the bureaucracy wanted evidence. And in the echo between those realms, stage and file room, recalibrated toward the oldest arbiter in a noisy republic, documents that outlast shouting. Paper settles noisy arguments. Within hours of Obama's calm but lethal words, the internet had turned into an unstoppable wave machine. Clips of the interview weren't just spreading, they were multiplying, each edit reshaped into memes, parodies, reaction videos, and highlight reels. On TikTok, the split screen became unavoidable. Obama's steady gaze frozen beside Trump's red-faced tirade, looping again and again under captions like "Spot the leader," and students recorded themselves reenacting the moment in dorm rooms. Teachers used it as an impromptu case study in rhetoric, and comedians stitched themselves into the footage with punchlines that only underscored the contrast. Twitter, or what was now branded as X, became a battlefield. Hashtags like calm truth and dead split screen surged, trending worldwide. Political pundits and casual users alike latched onto the imagery, writing threads that broke down every pause in Obama's delivery, every crack in Trump's volume-heavy rebuttal. The platform felt less like a discussion forum and more like a jury box, millions of voices deciding credibility in real time. The verdict forming wasn't about policy specifics, but about trust, and who seemed believable when the pressure hit hardest. YouTube, meanwhile, became the archive of the cultural explosion. Reaction channels hit millions of views in hours, posting breakdowns titled, "Why Obama's Calm Beat Trump's Fury" and "The Split Screen That Defines 2025. Some creators went beyond commentary, editing decades of footage into compilations. Obama's quiet authority juxtaposed against Trump's defiance and rage. These supercuts became modern political textbooks, viral narratives packaged for mass consumption. Late-night television played the role of amplifier. Monologues mocked Trump's all-caps fury while praising Obama's restraint. One comedian opened his show with a simple gag. He poured 2 glasses of water, one still, one boiling, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, America's choice." The audience roared, and within hours, that clip itself went viral. Even internationally, the coverage took on the tone of spectacle. BBC called it a televised trial without a courtroom, while Al Jazeera framed it as a clash of credibility with global implications. European networks ran their own split-screen graphics showing the calm versus Chales moment as if it were a cinematic trailer for democracy's stakes. For viewers abroad, the story wasn't just about Obama and Trump. The internet had taken what was meant as a singular interview and stretched it into an unrelenting storyline. For the first time in years, both supporters and skeptics admitted the same thing. This wasn't going away. The footage had too much weight, the contrast too sharp, the emotions too raw. America had seen the split screen, and the split screen had burned itself into memory. While the internet buzzed and hashtags trended, institutions began to feel the aftershocks. Capitol Hill became the first ground zero. Reporters hounded lawmakers in hallways, shoving microphones forward with the same blunt question, "Do you believe Obama?" The responses varied. Some Republicans dodged with practiced lines, "We're focused on the issues that matter to families." Others cracked under pressure. "Look, if the former president is saying this, it deserves a closer look." That one soundbite aired on repeat, becoming symbolic of cracks in partisan armor. Inside the White House, aides scrambled to contain the storm. Briefings were hastily rewritten, messaging strategies retooled. Yet every official defense seemed shaky when spliced side by side with the clip that wouldn't die. Anonymous leaks whispered that, even inside Trump's orbit, panic simmered. Staffers worried not about Obama's words alone, but about how effectively those words had bypassed noise and landed with clarity. Donors, too, grew restless. Political fundraisers reported phone calls filled with unease. Is he losing control of the narrative? Can we sustain this much damage in a cycle this fragile? The optics battle wasn't about finances directly, but about perception, and perception was everything. Credibility, not cash, was the new currency, and Obama had just banked a fortune. In classrooms, young voters saw the split-screen moment as generational shorthand. Professors compared it to the Kennedy-Nixon debate of 1960, where visual contrast outweighed words. For many students, the lesson was clear. Leadership in modern America wasn't just policy, it was poise, and Obama had delivered a masterclass. Meanwhile, polling began to shift subtly but unmistakably. Focus groups repeated the word credibility again and again, while independents described Trump as rattled and Obama as steady. It wasn't a landslide shift, but in close politics, perception cracks can become avalanches. Pollsters reported early tremors that suggested this was more than a news cycle. It was a credibility crisis. The military community added another unexpected dimension. Veterans groups issued statements praising Obama's composure, noting that calm under fire was the definition of leadership. Trump's allies dismissed it as political opportunism, but the soundbite stuck. Calmness equaled discipline, and discipline equaled trust. By the week's end, the fallout had escalated from cultural chatter to systemic pressure. Lawmakers whispered about investigations, journalists dug for supporting documents, and watchdog groups filed formal requests. The silence Obama had condemned was breaking, replaced by noise from every corner of American life. This wasn't just a clash of two men anymore. It had become a test of America's institutions, its voters, and its memory. The internet had made it viral. Institutions had made it consequential, and together they ensured the confrontation would echo far beyond the studio lights where it began. The confrontation between Barack Obama and Donald Trump was never just about one interview, one press conference, or even one political cycle. It was about a deeper American struggle, the question of credibility, of trust, of whether common honesty can survive in a world addicted to rage and spectacle. The split-screen moment that captured the nation was more than an image. It was a mirror. In that mirror, millions saw the country they wanted and the country they feared, side by side. For some, Obama's deliberate cadence reminded them of steadiness, an echo of leadership rooted in patience, knowledge, and restraint. For others, Trump's fury looked familiar, almost comforting in its defiance. Yet, when the dust settled, it wasn't the volume of his voice that lingered, it was the clarity of Obama's words. In kitchens, classrooms, and coffee shops, the phrase, "People deserve honesty," replayed louder than any all-caps outburst. The simple truth is that credibility doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just stands, unshaken. America finds itself at a crossroads because of that moment. Do we reward fury, or do we reward composure? Do we believe in those who can withstand pressure without breaking, or those who make chaos their shield? This confrontation isn't just political theater. It's a warning flare. Democracies don't fall when leaders disagree. They fall when people stop caring about the difference between truth and noise. That's why this matters, and that's why it can't be forgotten. Whether you agree with Obama or with Trump, what you witnessed was more than rivalry. It was a lesson. One man sat calm, steady, willing to risk criticism by speaking facts. The other lashed out, consumed by anger, desperate to control a narrative slipping away. History may remember this as a turning point not because of the allegations alone, but because Americans saw two versions of leadership collide in real time. And the choice wasn't abstract. It was visual, emotional, unforgettable. Now, the question is yours. What side of history do you want to stand on? Will you be part of the chorus that demands honesty, or will you settle for the noise? Will you let spectacle dictate your understanding of leadership, or will you stand for the discipline of truth? This isn't about one party, one election, or even one scandal. It's about whether we, as a people, demand something better, whether we still believe that calm clarity can cut through chaos. If this moment shook you, share it. Talk about it. Make sure others see it. Because silence is how stories like this die, and noise is how lies survive. Don't let the lesson fade. Let it spread. Let it grow. Let it remind people that leadership is more than fury. It's credibility under fire. So if you believe honesty matters more than rage, stay with us. Subscribe, share this story, and add your voice to the movement. Because history isn't written by the loudest. It's written by those who refuse to stay silent. And together, we can make sure this story is remembered as the moment America chose clarity over chaos.